Good overnight, and welcome on in to the overnight edition of From Day One. Due to technical difficulties we had with last night's overnight, we are going to go back a little bit in time on the broadcast of Art Bell and the God part of the brain, so that anything that might have got lost in the inclement weather technical difficulties does not get lost. So, without further ado, back in time to Dark Matter. Here is part 2 tonight of the God part of the brain from September 25th, 2015. Sorry, 13.
You don't believe any of this. You're saying everybody is driven universally.
Okay, we'll get there.
All right, well,
leaps
so
and
get
bounds
there.
ahead of the picture here. Let's
right.
just start with sociobiology.
Well, I have to complain a little.
Okay. So, essentially, let's take, for instance, with humans, the fact that every human culture, no matter how isolated, is communicated through language, basically suggesting that we are a linguistic animal. It's part of our makeup. Well, now with the development of the neurosciences, we can look into the brain, and we know exactly where the language centers of the brain are. It's the Wernicke's area, the Broca's area, the angular gyrus. You damage one of those parts, you bang your head, you get a tumor in that area, you'll lose some part of your linguistic ability. It's called an aphasia. So, proof that these behaviors are generating from within the brain. So I took that principle and applied it to the fact that every human culture, from the dawn of our species, no matter how isolated, has believed in some form of a spiritual realm.
Sun, the moon, something.
Something. Spirits, whatever. Some form of a spiritual reality, has prayed to something.
Right.
So, suggesting that it must be built into us, that somewhere in the human brain, there must be parts of the brain, what I informally refer to as the God part of the brain, that compels us to have these spiritual beliefs and to create religions around those beliefs. So, again, the universality is actually one of the proofs that there must be a part of the brain that generates these perceptions. Okay, so then there's the neurophysiological proof.
I don't know if that, listen, I don't know if that boils down to proof. That boils down to, here's what Matthew thinks.
Okay, fine. Well, it's in scientific terms, the science is basically, you use sociobiology as a validation. If you can find a behavior that's universal in an animal, most scientists will say that that's generally a sign that it's built into that creature. It's an inherited reflex. But,
but I could use the same argument, Matthew, to say the universal nature of it makes the other argument as well.
Okay, and again, we'll go there. This is all a warm-up. I'm just building up the argument here, and then we can discuss sort of in detail. But yes.
Yeah, but when you say proof, I want to feel cinder blocks falling on my feet.
Okay, here comes some cinder blocks.
All right.
Okay. The next part is the neurophysiological argument, and this is now connecting. So here I am just building up to suggest that maybe this is in our heads, that maybe the fact that it's so universal would suggest that it's coming from part of the brain. So, in the last 20-odd years or so, people have started putting people in the midst of prayer in MRIs. Right. They've done it with Franciscan nuns, Buddhist monks, and basically at this point, the hyper-religious of every belief system out there. And what they find is the same thing happens. If you meditate or pray, or you are in the midst of what you might call a religious or mystical experience. Okay, what happens if you're having one of these experiences, based on the findings of MRIs, is that a couple things happen. One, for instance, your brain's amygdala, part of the limbic system, which is responsible for generating fear and anxiety, gets a decreased blood flow. One of the universal descriptors of a spiritual experience is a sense of euphoria, bliss, tranquility. Normal fears and anxieties are dissipated. It relaxes us. So we kind of have like a built-in drug in our heads. If we think about God...
Stop for a second. Stop. You said a decreased blood flow to the amygdala. Mm-hmm. All right. What would science predict? What effect would science predict that a decreased blood flow would have?
Well, I'm saying the amygdala is the part of the limbic system. It's part of our brain that generates fear and anxiety.
Okay. So
yeah, exactly. Okay, that's one of the symptoms. Another is the brain's parietal lobe, which is responsible for generating spatial and temporal consciousness, also gets a decreased blood flow. So we're left feeling this ethereal sense of timelessness and spacelessness. Our normal boundaries of reality start to wane, and we're left feeling another symptom. The brain's right frontal lobe also decreased blood flow. They found that that's where generally where ego, where personality is generated. People who suffer from something called Pick's disease, which is a deterioration of that part of the brain, lose their normal sense of self. Their taste change, their sense of identity is altered. So when that part of the brain gets a decreased blood flow, our normal ego boundaries are dissipated. We no longer feel like me, we feel like one with the universe. So again, these are all physical things that happen if we meditate or pray that leave us feeling a certain way. So the brain is geared towards these behaviors to leave us in a certain state, to alter perception.
All right, I'm willing to concede these changes that you have described in the brain. Mm-hmm. However, what's wrong with suggesting that when you get in that state, when you get in a spiritual state, whatever it is you worship, that entity is not producing these changes in your brain that are causing you to feel this way? I mean,
well, which entity? Because they've done these experiments on people from every religion. So it would mean that basically any belief we can come up with. If I believe in the great big bird in the sky, he must be real because I'm having the same effect as someone who's praying to Allah or Jesus.
Hail Big Bird.
Hail Big Bird. So, okay, that's point one. Then you've got this guy, Dr. Ramachandran at UCLA, who found, he was doing research on epilepsy, and he found that there was a group of epileptics who suffered from what was called temporal lobe epilepsy. And people who suffered from this specific type of epilepsy, first of all, 25% of them tend towards hyper-religiosity. So he was finding that people who had temporal lobe epilepsy, 1 out of 4 of them were somehow coincidentally hyper-religious people. Moreover, they were reporting that during their seizures, they were having intense religious experiences. And as a matter of fact, reading from their Bible or hearing things that in any way reminded them of their religion, choir, choruses, or whatever, could stimulate the seizure, in which case they would come out of it feeling like that they had a religious experience. To support that, there are 2 scientists, 2 doctors, Saver and Rabin, also at UCLA, who were neuroscientists and historians and started looking back and doing some research and finding that a lot of the world's prophets suffered symptoms that seemed to indicate that they were potentially epileptics, from Joan of Arc to the Apostle Paul to Muhammad. In historical writings, there seems to be evidence that they suffered from epilepsy. Dostoevsky, for instance, who was an epileptic, he wrote in his book, The Idiot, he wrote, and I quote, I have really touched God. He came into me. You healthy people cannot imagine the happiness we epileptics feel seconds before we suffer from one of our attacks. Again, all suggesting that this is a brain state, not like God literally entering these people, but that their brains, which albeit a little bit broken, somehow in that breakage, it's prompting, it's inducing a religious experience. But it's coming from a dysfunction.
I also believe, and I hate to help you here, but it is true that scientists have been able to electrically stimulate brains in certain areas and produce religious/spiritual experiences.
Yes,
even near death.
Yes. Well, that's a different phenomenon. What you're talking about is the transcranial magnetic stimulator, which electromagnetically stimulates specific points in the brain. And if you pointed at, like the temporal lobe, for instance, or some of these other parts, it can induce a religious experience. Which eventually I'm going to get to with the whole that ethnobotany, the last proof I'll go to, which is where people take certain drugs or plants to do the same thing. Again, suggesting it's all chemical in nature. But back to the neurophysiological, the same person who was going around with this transcranial magnetic stimulator was also interviewing people, and in his interviews with high school students, he found that 1 out of 5 of them who reportedly, said that they were very religious, had also reported that they suffered some type of traumatic brain injury during their lives. This coincides with the work of a Dr. Arnold Sadwin, the former chief of neuropsychiatry at University of Pennsylvania, who was doing research on something called organic psycho syndrome, basically people who suffer from traumatic brain injuries, and it alters their behaviors or their perceptions. He found that there were people, and he was one of the first people who wrote to me after hearing me on your show, saying, I've been doing this research for years, and you made it make sense, because I could never understand why families of people were saying, yeah, he suffered a head injury, and suddenly he's super religious, or he was super religious, and now he doesn't go to church or couldn't care less.
Right.
That people can suffer from religious organic psycho syndromes, or if you're banged in the head, it can suddenly turn you into a hyper-religious person or a non-religious person, depending on where you started from. Again, all suggesting that these are just based on the mechanics of the brain as opposed to some ethereal reality beyond us. That it's all an extension, a manifestation of what's going on inside of our heads. So more or less, and I could keep going, but that's generally the work that's been done to suggest from a neurophysiological standpoint that again, God is in your head and not outside of it.
Have you done any research at all into why it is that people from New York, and specifically Brooklyn, irritate the hell out of people in the rest of the country?
It's an ongoing investigation. I'll let you know when we get results.
It really is true. I mean, on top of everything else, I remember on the old shows we had, I would get these emails afterwards raging, and then at the bottom they'd always put, besides, I can't stand his New York accent.
Yeah, well, sorry about that, people. Deal with it.
Yeah. Okay, now...
Okay, shall I?
You separate,
mm-hmm.
right? Religious and spiritualism. Religion and spiritualism.
Well, basically, I write that there are two distinct instincts going on here. Two separate regions in the brain that are doing two separate things. So I basically break it into the spiritual instinct and the religious instinct. So spirituality and religiosity are two separate things. So yeah.
Separate part of the brain or same?
Separate parts of the brain. So, for instance, most of religiosity, people who really talk about their religion or God, like these temporal lobe epileptics, it seems to be coming from the temporal lobe, whereas the spiritual experience, which is a different thing, it's that sense of calm, of oneness with the universe, God consciousness, etc. That's based in a combination of like the amygdala, the parietal lobe. It's a different experience. So basically, there's two things coinciding at work here. You've got the capacity for us to have these experiences where our normal ego boundaries are reduced and we feel one with the world, one with the universe, maybe one with God. So through these experiences, we're left feeling that we're connected to something higher. So based on these feelings that prompt beliefs, we then, through the religious instinct, which is more responsible for creating political institutions, for creating laws and rituals and customs, for mythologies, for basically solidifying those spiritual experiences we have, which are more sensory in nature, and consolidating them into sort of a mythical paradigm, which has politics and customs and rituals and rules we have to abide by, which give us a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of purpose. So that's why you can have people who might report that they're very religious, they're very involved in going to church and the rituals, but they wouldn't necessarily describe themselves as spiritual. And you have other people who say, I'm highly spiritual, but I'm not at all religious.
A lot of people say that.
Yeah. So meaning they can connect with the experience of like the oneness with the universe, and that if they meditate or pray, it relaxes them. They feel, they feel one with God.
All right. They cannot embrace God, but they can embrace some form of spiritual
Well, in some cases it might be God. It doesn't mean like religion. It doesn't mean that you can be. It doesn't mean that spirituality negates God. It just means that you believe in some aspect of a spiritual realm, but you might not. You might not abide by any particular rituals. You might not feel you need to go to church or confess to a priest or any of the above, but you still feel that you're connected to the spiritual realm.
All right, so if we were to examine your brain, we would find your amygdala flooded with blood constantly, right?
You'd probably just see like Bugs Bunny chasing a turtle.
You know, I'm actually not really trying to be funny here. It seems to me that if you can prove one thing, then you should be able to take somebody such as yourself, a true non-believer,
Well,
and prove the other, and show the blood flow continues as normal. There's no lessening. You're not relaxing. You're going 100 miles an hour as usual.
You only lead me to chapter 12. Why are there atheists?
All right, let's jump to chapter 12.
Okay.
Why are there?
Okay. Well, basically, for every physical trait we possess, we fall into a bell curve. You take any given population, let's say a random sample of 1,000 people, and you measure them, let's say a physical trait like height. Basically, the majority will fall into the category of what we will call average height, the bulge of the bell curve, and on the tapering extremes, there might be 10%, let's say, who are shorter than the norm, and 10% that are taller than the norm. Again,
I have
a bell curve.
Bulging bell curve.
Well, I'm sure that makes your wife very happy.
No, that's not that one. Anyway.
Okay. Anyway, so let's take something, a more abstract trait like musicality. Same thing. You take a random sampling of 1,000 people from any culture, and you investigate their musical abilities. And you'll find the same bell curve will ensue. That the average person, the majority of people that you poll will have what we would call average musical intelligence or musical ability. They can hum a tune. If you clap in rhythm, they can copy you. But on the tapering extremes, they're going to be, let's say, 15% on either side who are going to be either tone deaf on one end and musical savants on the extreme of the other end.
All right. I don't think it makes any difference. Now, for example, I have zero musical talent, Matthew. However, I would report to you this. When I listen to music that I love, I have something that approximates a spiritual experience.
Okay, I fall into a similar category. But again, musicality is a complex trait. It's not just one thing. So there's ability to comprehend music. Like there might be someone who's a genius as a music critic, but he'll never play a tune. You give him a guitar and you might as well give it to my cat. So,
but I'm saying it's kind of like a spiritual experience. It really is very close to it. It changes your outlook on life. You can sit and listen to music and go from an angry state to a relaxed state to perhaps even a joyous state.
Okay. Well, I'm not an expert on musical consciousness and musical intelligence, but there are whole books written on it. They've done the same kind of MRI experiments. And absolutely, music changes the brain.
There you go.
Yeah. You listen to a John Philip Sousa march, and you get people riled up, and they go out and they fight for you. You play, some more peaceful, contemplative classical music, and it relaxes people, or they feel sad. So music can generate all these various emotions, but generally speaking, let's say in terms of musical talent, the same bell curve emerges. Again, it's a physical trait. It comes from a part of the brain, and it's a result of genetic variance. We're all different. We all, but we fall within a curve for every physical trait. The same thing applies to spirituality and religiosity. So though the majority of the world, of our species, has what we could call average spiritual/religious intelligence, an average capacity to believe in something, to pray to something. On the tapering extremes, you have a portion of any given population who are going to be hyper-religious. They're going to be the people, giving heartfelt sermons at the pulpit at 10 years old. They've got the spirit born into them. And then on the other extreme, you're going to have people who just are religiously tone deaf. They don't get it. They don't care. It doesn't play any interest in their life. They're more interested in going fishing, fixing their car engine, whatever it is that turns them on, but they don't get God and they couldn't care less. So again, because of the physicality, the physical nature of this perception, not everyone is religious. Just like not everyone is musical. It's part of our nature, but whatever our nature is, not everyone is any one thing.
Okay, I'm curious about something, Matthew, and you may not have the answer to this.
Okay.
But you are, as your own description, a hardline atheist.
Mm-hmm.
How many people like yourself in this country do you think there are? I mean, we know, for example, how many Catholics and how many, and so forth and so on. So how many people like you?
Well, there's me, there's Steve, there's this guy Jimmy down the block.
No, I was honestly searching.
Yeah. They've done studies and basically...
Percentage of population, how about that?
Yeah, but they say that in America, that the percentage of people who claim to be atheists is something like 8%.
8%?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, which would kind of fall into the bell curve. But with most developed Western nations, we are on the low end, whereas most European countries would report something closer to between 20 and 30% of atheism.
Is that so?
Yeah. As far as developed countries, we are the...
How about the Asian countries, out of curiosity? A lot of them are not believing in one specific religion. They have ancestor worship, all kinds of things.
Right. Well, they're as spiritual as everyone. And even, for instance, in China, where religion is condemned, religion is the Communist Party. You're not allowed to have a church there. Nevertheless, as much as you might try to suppress it, same thing as they did in Communist Russia before that fell and is now soon to reemerge. But even in China, they're reported as being some of the most superstitious people on earth. So they've repressed religion, and this tendency, this need to believe in some type of transcendental alternative reality has emerged through superstition. They are heavy into numerology, the luck of numbers, having the right numbers, etc.
Yes.
So it's like, you can only suppress instinct so far. Eventually, the animal in man will emerge somehow. And this is part of the animal man, to be a religious animal.
You've got your first love letter here. T wants to know, I'd like to know, is it a prerequisite of atheism to be such a condescending, self-righteous ass?
No, that's just me.
No, that's just you. People, that you make people very angry, right?
Well, I mean, what I'm suggesting here essentially would invalidate anyone's beliefs. Whether you believe in the power of the crystal at your bedside or
does them all in. I absolutely agree.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. All right, hold on. We're going to take a brief break here and think about all this. Think really hard about all this. When we come back, we'll talk about near-death experiences. That should be an interesting one. What do you think? Light? Do you see the light? Down there. End of the hall. There's the light. I wonder if falling in love is like a spiritual experience. I wonder if falling in love is like believing in God. I wonder if falling in love is a spiritual experience. Matthew, what do you think?
Well, and I do, though, again, the God part of the brain mostly focuses on religious and spiritual consciousness. I do go into certain peripheral items here and there, like music or love, for instance. And I think on one of the first shows, you asked me, well, what about love? Is that also just the mechanics of the brain? And you say there's nothing spiritual about that. And I said, well, give it time, and eventually they will find it's the mechanics of the brain since have. So basically, you've got a woman, Dr. Helen Fisher at Rutgers, and it's kind of her specialty. She writes on the neuromechanics of the experience of love, and basically has found that even though lust is governed by the hormones of estrogen and testosterone, the feeling feeling of what we call love, of being bonded by another person, is guided by our neurotransmitters, particularly those of oxytocin and vasopressin. So, for instance, after we have sex with someone, our bodies flood with oxytocin, vasopressin, these two neurotransmitters that make us feel very connected, or we might call in love with the person we were just with, which was all chemical, which would explain why two people who might be utter strangers met drunk at a party one night, and after a night of passionate lovemaking, woke up looking at each other's eyes like we found the one, even though they might not know each other's last names, maybe even first names, because it's just our chemistry manipulating us and making us have these feelings.
Sometimes they end up right at the altar after a spiritual experience.
That's right, with Elvis. Moreover, for instance, if you stimulate a woman's nipples, it will also cause the secretion of these neurotransmitters, not just for the sex act, but also if an infant child is suckling at her breast, it will cause the secretion of these neurotransmitters, which will make the mother feel bonded to her child.
I'm sure there's other areas we could get to, but I'd rather not. Let me go to near death. I have interviewed so many, Matthew, who had near-death experiences, and they all have sort of the same story. I mean, they clinically die, no more heart pumping, no more anything. Some for as long as an hour or more. I mean, serious periods of time. They come back with similar stories, and I refer, of course, to the right at the end of the long tunnel or whatever it is. I refer to relatives who have passed before, and I refer to messages that are given to them in these states. Now, it's pretty strong evidence, frankly, of something or another. What do you think it's evidence of?
Well, again, based on research that's now being done in this field, on the sort of the brain science behind religious perception, there's a guy, Dr. Jansen, who his specialty is near-death experiences, and he studied the brains of, basically people having these experiences. And essentially a near-death experience, what it is when you're, first of all, no one has ever clinically died, unless you're a mythical character from Homer's Odyssey. Nobody died. Your heart might have stopped, but your heart's just a pump. It's just an organ that's a pump, like a bike pump. All it's doing is getting oxygen to your cells.
Wow.
If your brain has stopped, if your brain has not received oxygen for, let's say, 10 minutes, and then you came back, then you can tell a story. But, okay.
Oh, Matthew, it's happened.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry, it's happened. Absolutely, it's happened in longer than 10 minutes.
All right, well, the medical community would probably disagree, but fine.
No,
Regardless, this guy Jansen has found that what happens is, if you are getting a decreased blood flow to the brain, so you suffer a heart attack, your heart starts pumping that blood, you are in an accident, you're gushing blood, so you're not getting the same amount, you have low oxygen levels to your brain will secrete a neurotransmitter called glutamate. Glutamate is very similar to the drug ketamine, which is a psychedelic. And basically...
Thank God for glutamate, right?
Huh? Thank God for glutamate.
For glutamate, yes.
Well, what it does is, it does a few things. One of the things it does is it makes your body start pumping out endorphins, so it relaxes you.
Right.
So, let's say you were in an accident, you've been gassed somewhere and you're losing blood, your heart will relax. Instead of panicking, your heart pumps faster, you die quicker, you relax, your heart slows down, you don't lose blood as quickly. So it's all just the mechanics of the body trying to keep us alive. Nice little evolutionary trick. But not only have they found that this is what happens with the secretion of glutamate, but they have used ketamine to induce the same experience, because the chemical bond of ketamine is similar to glutamate. And if you give people glutamate, you can induce a near-death experience. And one of the things he found, for instance, is when the brain secretes glutamate, the optic nerve is triggered. So basically, whether your eyes are closed or not, you see a white light. Your being is still a sensory perception of white light. And then probably what's going on is the rest of the neuromechanics involved in religious experience. Maybe your temporal lobe is being stimulated, so you're having experiences of God and religion. But one thing, so a couple things. One thing is the universality, the fact that the descriptors are the same regardless of culture would lead me to believe that it's a facet of our biology. Moreover, you could have 10 people from 10 different religions, and they'll tell you at the end of their tunnel, they saw Allah, and the next guy saw Jesus, and the next guy saw Moses, and the next guy saw Zeus, and the other guy saw Odin. So are all of them real, or is it just the way that the brain operates that it triggers in our heads to have these perceptions of what we were taught that God is? So again, for me, the argument falls in favor of that it's all neuromechanical. It's not like we're actually getting a visitation like some, the Holy Ghost out there of every religion knows that you're on the brink of death and comes and visits you by, suddenly you see white light.
I think that's a fair comment. I mean, that each religion sees its own savior. It's true.
Right. So either they're all real or none of them are real.
True. Well,
and again, so then that must mean that the great big bird is also out there, because that's who I see when I shoot up ketamine for recreational reasons.
Do you really see Big Bird?
Well, no, but makes good radio.
Out of curiosity, idle curiosity, what do you see? Have you had any experiences?
Well, and again, this is all stuff that I discuss in Icarus of Brooklyn, the prequel follow-up to God part, in which I discuss my drug experiences. There's a chapter, Drugs in Meditation, and the chapter after that is called LSD. I was exploring all sorts of psychedelics with the hopes. Again, not that I expect this to curb the flow of love letters, as you call them, but, I want people to realize that I was just a guy looking like anyone else to find God. I was hopeful that he was out there. I mean, heck, if right now I had the option between immortality in another 30 or so odd years and then nothingness forevermore, I mean, heck, I'll take eternity. That could be interesting. Like, I don't...
You know what? Part of me hears a little bit of kink in your armor.
Okay.
Like kind of wish you would discover it.
Yeah.
Is that there? Do you admit to a little?
Well,
I wish it was there. I wish I could find it.
Well, no, I don't believe I will, because I believe that I've done ample research in this direction, and I am convinced, just as I am with most of the principles of scientific theory, be it evolution.
Can one ever do enough ketamine?
Do enough ketamine? Meaning what? Well, I don't play with ketamine. I mean, no. Maybe if I were younger and it were out there, it didn't come out.
What you said.
No, I was done with my experimentation at age 19. I ended up having a very bad LSD trip that basically landed me in a mental hospital. So, and I learned a lot about the chemistry of the brain while I was there.
Well, now, wait a minute. Let's go back to an earlier segment. You said you had a bad LSD trip, landed you in a mental hospital.
Yeah.
But you also said that when people get damage to their brain, that suddenly they can come out thinking an entirely new thing, not believing in God, or suddenly believing in God, or having a total conversion. Let's talk damage here, LSD damage.
Right. Well, first of all, I mean, generally, that with organic psycho syndromes, they're usually not chemical. They're usually like head trauma, like being bashed in the head, like a fall or a car accident. Chemically induced changes, I don't know if there's really much. I don't think that there's.
Oh, come on, we're nothing but chemistry.
But that's not how it happened to me anyway. It's not like I had a bad LSD trip and suddenly I woke up and I was an atheist one day. No, when I finally came out of this bad trip, with the help of psychopharmacological drugs, I was basically restored to my old self, which was a guy who was questioning, and I continued to question thereafter, but I now had a little bit more information about how the brain works and the chemistry of the brain. So, so it's...
I had to ask.
Sure. No, it's a good question. It's a very good question.
Bear with me. I'm not very reverent. Okay, so anyway, on near death, you're saying it's all chemical. It's just purely chemical.
Well, basically, yeah, I'm saying all of our religious and spiritual experiences are chemical in nature. They're all coming from the neurochemistry, the neuromechanics of the brain. So, for instance, I was going through my initial proofs or arguments to validate this notion of a God part of the brain, and I went through the sociobiological and neurophysiological, and I didn't get to finish. So let me, if I can quickly stick those in there. There's also the genetic argument, and like I said, what I call the ethnobotanical. The ethnobotanical is relevant at this point because basically ethnobotany is the study of cultures and their use of various plants, and for any number of reasons, including part of their religious experience. Various cultures have used what are called entheogens, substances which are used by different cultures to induce religious experience. So you have everything from, the Scythians using cannabis, to the Africans using ayahuasca, to the Aztecs using mescaline, which they refer to as the food of the gods, all to induce a religious experience. And this is, again, a universal. So, again, basically suggesting that if you can take a substance and it can make you see God, that would suggest that it's the chemistry of that substance that alters the brain in a specific way, not like you had a visitation. Like God came from a cloud up in the sky, he saw that you popped the pill or ate or chewed on a plant and decided to come down, whether it be in the form of Zeus or Odin or Allah or the great spirit bird, whatever you want to call it. Again, this is all, I would believe, validation that it's coming from the neuromechanics of the brain as opposed to an actual visitation from our spiritual realm.
All right, but just because you took a shroom and suddenly you feel very religious or you feel very spiritual, that doesn't negate the possibility of there still being a God, and the mushroom just caused you to appreciate it more, and it was just an aid to what's already there.
Okay, and again, I'll bring up again the fact that these chemicals have been used to induce religious experiences of a variety of religions.
But that might be all right. That just might be an aid. Just like smoking a little pot makes music sound better, right?
Absolutely. And I agree, but the thing is, the burden of proof, you can never, look, nothing that I write or say or investigate could ever, with absolute certainty, negate the existence of a spiritual realm. So, for instance, right now as I speak, there might be some magical, invisible leprechaun dancing on my head. And I could never prove that there isn't. But the burden of proof should lie in that there is. Because it's an absurdity to expect, again, one can't, through proof, negate the existence of things. You can only prove the existence. So, if I were going to believe in something, if I were going to dedicate my life to the belief in something, I wouldn't, put the burden of proof saying, well, why do I put all of my energy into believing, let's say, in the dancing leprechaun, simply because you can't prove he's not there? I would hope that I'd be able to say, well, let me tell you 50 ways where I can prove, not say I felt him or I saw him, but I can prove, just like I can prove 1 + 1 is 2, or that if I turn the key on my car ignition, the car starts. So again, absolutely nothing I say will ever negate the existence of God. These are just...
Well, and having said that, how can you not admit to a little chink in what you said was absolute? In other words, sure, you're an atheist.
Well, these are just like necessary disclaimers. I mean, even in the sciences, look, we use science for all of our technologies are built on science. We go to doctors, we take medications, we get heart transplants, we fly on airplanes. Right now on the phone we're using, it's a scientific technology. If it weren't for science, we wouldn't be talking right now. So, nevertheless, within the sciences, there are only 5 laws, the laws of thermodynamics. Everything else is considered a theory. So the theory of electromagnetism gave birth to the phone that we're on. So it's all theory. So as a scientist, I have to allow for the disclaimer that Look, as Einstein said, it takes a million proofs to prove a theory right. It only takes one to prove a theory wrong. So, for instance, if tomorrow the sun does not set in the west, boom, there goes the whole theory of the Earth turning around the sun, etc. It just takes one to make it go wrong. And that, again, as a scientist, I feel responsible to put that disclaimer out there, but still, I just as much as I believe that when this phone rang and I picked it up, that Art Bell's going to be on the other end, or at least that the phone's operating, or if I flip this light switch next to me, that the light will go off. I have faith that the light will go off, but before I flip it, if you say, 100%, absolutely that the light will go off, I say, no, I feel 99.9999% that the light will go off.
Are both your parents alive still, Matthew?
Yes.
They are. Okay. How about grandma?
No. All of my grandparents are gone.
All right. So if you were to suddenly seize up, drop on the floor, see the light, talk with your grandmother, who would sit you down and say things to you that she never said when she was alive, and you came back. I guess when you revived and you felt a little better, you'd say, damn chemicals.
I'd say cool hallucination. I felt the presence of Grandma. It sounded like she was talking to me. She told me some story about, the time she played poker with Aunt Leah.
So that wouldn't be enough.
Well, just because I had that perception, I don't even know if she played poker with Aunt Leah, but in my brain, that's what happened. Now, if I passed out and came out of a coma and said, you won't believe this, I had this wild hallucination of and they stopped me and said, yes, we saw it too. We were at your bedside, and suddenly the spirit of Grandma appeared, and she told us about how she played poker with Aunt Leah, then I'd be like, okay, this just got...
I got a better one, Matthew. How about you die? Your grandma says she lost her house to Aunt Leah years and years and decades ago. She actually lost her house, and you had no knowledge of that. You came back, and you related your experience. They said, oh, yes, she lost her house. Never told you about that one. How about that?
I would just say either I don't recall when she told me that, or somewhere sitting in my subconscious was the realization that she sold her house, and I kind of forgot about it until I had this hallucination. But,
you know what I think? I think that atheism for you is more than it's a religion.
It's a lack of belief.
Well, for you to say you wouldn't react, you'd somehow write it off.
Okay.
Now, that's not logical, Matthew.
Look, there are people every day. Let's just say, every society has their own mythology. So let's just say in the Christian world, Christians who truly believe in the word of the Bible, so who are true creationists. And in their conscious reality, creationism is the way that the world came about. That 5,000 years ago, or whatever it was, in 7 days God created the world. That is as real to them as you're suggesting the hallucination, or this fact that my grandmother came to me, or that it's somehow a faith for me. The faith for me isn't atheism, it's science. And science represents the lack of that belief. So, for instance, you could say...
How would your belief in science dismiss the fact that you had received some information that you could not possibly have received in any other way?
Again, I wouldn't put that much faith in not possible to receive. Again, our heads are full of so much subconscious information, stuff that we forgot, that if we're reminded of today, we might think it was new. Or I might just distrust the person who's saying it. Maybe they want attention, so they're going to say, yeah, I had a visit. I know that I died and I had a visitation by my grandma. But you could say, like, for instance, evolutionary theory, the opposing belief over creationism. You could say, oh, well, I think that's your religion. And I'd say, no, it's not. It's just something I have faith in because it follows a certain logical order that I have put my faith in. So just because I don't believe in creationism, it doesn't mean, which for some people, that is their religion, that is their belief. Just because I don't believe in their belief, it doesn't mean my belief becomes a religion.
It almost does, Matthew. When you say that you would ignore the science of having received a fact you could not have received any other way, you would ignore it and have faith in your atheism.
No, I would have faith in the fact
Because
that...
you'd write it off. You'd write it off, right? You'd find a way to dismiss it. Well, what are the odds that Grandma lost her house and you hallucinated that information that you didn't know? I mean, come on.
I am just like I am so convinced by evolutionary theory over creationism, so convinced that nothing could happen that would make me believe in creationism.
Obviously.
Right, okay. For the same reason, and again, based on all of this very thorough research that I've done, I have such faith in this notion that it's all based in our brain, it's all perceptual, that even if it was something as specific that I came out of a coma and was like, I don't know, numbers 8, 7, 5, and let's say listed a length of 20 numbers, and my mother turned to me and said, oh my God, that was your grandmother's social security number and her something else number. How did you know that? And I said, I don't know, I had some when I was out cold, Grandma came to me and she told me those numbers.
Well, let's add to it then. Let's say you take those numbers after just claiming it all, and you go down to the corner store and you bet those numbers and you hit the lottery for about $800 million.
I would just say that was tremendous luck.
In other words, there is nothing that would cause you to change your root belief system. And that's a religion, buddy.
If God sits me on his lap, signs his autograph, and the members of the Supreme Court justices stand around observing it and notarize the autograph as authentic, I'll think about it.
All right. Hold on, Matthew. After going there, I have no idea where I can go. The man just doesn't believe. And even if he were hit over the head by Grandma and then hit the lottery with the numbers Grandma gave, he still wouldn't believe. He's a tough case, all right. I actually have a good love letter for him here, too. We'll get to that when we get back. From the high desert and the great American Southwest, this is Dark Matter. All right, Matthew, here we are again. Here we are.
I think you sell that antenna like someone who has faith in science. Makes me wonder.
I do have faith in science, Matthew.
Okay.
I do. I'm so totally into science. But that doesn't, it isn't where it stops. I mean, for you, it's like there's a wall there. Science is science, and then there's a wall, and you need to look on the other side of it.
Believe me, I have looked over that wall. It's just that there's nothing there. I spent a good portion of my life looking over the wall, looking through the wall, under the wall, into the wall.
Brain damage.
Must be.
All right, let's talk for a second. I mean, on this program, I talk a lot about the possibility or even probability of extraterrestrial life. Whether we'll hear from it, I did a show last night on that, whether we're going to hear signals eventually or not, whether we are being visited here on Earth. People have seen a lot of things, Matthew. People have been abducted. People have met these creatures. You know, I'm curious. What's your take?
Yeah, well, first of all, even just the language used, people have been abducted. People, the way I would phrase it, people have claimed to be abducted. Think of all the claims people make on a given day. That if you buy their product, they'll make you live longer. Or any number of things. There are prisons full of people with claims of things that aren't real. And there are people out of prison who are full of claims of things that aren't real. That's the nature of man.
And then some claims are real.
And yes, and some claims are real. But when they can't be backed up by, like, and here we have in this cage the actual alien. Meet Fred, the alien, and we get to speak to him, or the spaceship lands in New York City, and we all get to see it. We all get an equal anal probe, not just Jimmy in the cornfield.
Yeah, I hope it does land in New York.
Why not?
So in other words, you reject. So in other words, you reject anything of the sort.
No. No, I do not. Alien life, to me, does not fall within the guidelines of spiritual reality. As we know, organic forms do appear, such as us, so it's within the realm of the possible. Can't deny.
Well, I'd go beyond that. We're finding exoplanets everywhere now. In other words, planets like Earth. And the odds of life evolving elsewhere, scientifically, Matthew, are pretty damn high.
Well, we've yet to find one. So as much as it might be speculated, at least within our own solar system, we've yet to find definitive life. So, okay, here's my take on alien life. Do I believe that somewhere in the universe, organic forms have emerged besides man? I would probably say yes. Do I think intelligent life is formed, comparable to man? Even possible. Do I think we will ever meet any of them? That I do not believe. And here's my reasoning. Just based in the physics. Now, of course, you can negate all of this with time travel and space machines and magic wands that make you move from galaxy to galaxy in a second. But based on physics as I understand it, based on the principles of thermodynamics, this is the problem that I see. Let's take the closest star to Earth, Alpha Centauri. Alpha Centauri is 4.2 light years away, and it's the closest star. So it's the closest possible solar system where other life could have emerged. Is it likely that it's emerged in, coincidentally, the nearest star to us? Probably not. But let's even take the nearest star and work with that. 4.2 light years away. Well, light travels 186,000 miles per second, making a light year equal to approximately 6 trillion miles. That makes Alpha Centauri approximately 25 trillion miles away. The closest solar system to Earth, to our solar system. At that distance, if you were to take the fastest spacecraft that humans have created, which was the Voyager, at the speed of the Voyager, it would take 75,000 years for a craft to go from Earth to Alpha Centauri. And again, this is giving a leap that we're even going to say, let's say there's life on Alpha Centauri in one of the planets in its solar system. Even probably intelligent not. Life. Right, probably not. But I'm just going to give the benefit of the doubt, super intelligent life, smarter than us, maybe even capable of space travel. They're bouncing around the planet in their solar system. For them to get here, again, at a super fast pace, it would take 75,000 years. Let's say it's a species, I'm going to even give another stretch. Let's say it's a species that happens to have great longevity. Each individual lives to be 5,000 years old. Now,
let's look at another species, because I already know where you're going with that one. Let's look at a species that's been on Earth for 1 billion years, longer than we have. Quite likely, actually, when you consider things. Mm-hmm. 1 billion years longer than we have. Look at what has changed for us, Matthew, in the last 100 years. Now, project another 1 billion years. Now, let's start to assume that they found a way to travel faster than light, or they found a way to fold back space and jump from point A to point B. In other words, they can figure out...
Right, well, like I said, I knew, anyone where I would present this can go there, that yes, there might be technology. Again, I can't debate imaginary technologies that could do magical things. Yes, absolutely.
Only magical because we don't understand.
Right, no, not even magical. It's like super technological.
That was your word, not mine.
I know, I'm taking it back. Okay. Super technological, major advances beyond our capacity. Agreed. All of that's possible. But I do believe that the speed of light is a constant. I don't believe we will ever travel at it. I don't believe that molecules like in Star Trek, that there'll ever be, where we can project a human from one place to another in an instant, where molecules will dissipate, be sent through space beyond the speed of light, and then reemerge. I don't think, again, and this is all just based on my understanding of the laws of physics. Maybe what we know today will one day be, antiquated, and yes, we'll travel at the speed of light. I don't see it, but in the meantime, from what we do understand, yes, it would take like 20 generations of a very long-living species to travel here. So, even let's say they can bend space, it's still going to take a lot of work, and there's probably a lot of risk involved. So why would a species risk to bend space, come to Earth, do a few anal probes, maybe cut a few circles in the crops? It's like, would you travel a gazillion miles to ring someone's doorbell and run? Like, why aren't they here? Why aren't we hanging out with them? Why have they dominated us, made us their, like, you know, their doll to play with?
That's all fair comment, I suppose, and I don't have an answer for it, but I think that the other argument that they are out there somewhere and that there's somebody millions of years ahead of us is a reasonable argument, and so we could be visited. You know, you can't just blanketly deny it. By the way, I want you to hear this love letter, and this is from Ian. Says, "Hey, Art, I just wanted to say, as a former Christian and now an atheist, I agree with Mr. Alper, and I want to voice support for his views. I feel a far more spiritual feeling looking at pictures from Hubble than I do from the Bible. Thanks for having him on."
Excellellent. One for Matthew.
Make you feel warm and fuzzy and begins to take a little blood away from the amygdala, or what?
Well, thank whoever sent that.
Ian, yes.
Ian, thank you, Ian.
Right, okay. Now, let's talk about humans evolving. Let's look another, I don't know, 1,000 years from now. I would assume we'll take another evolutionary leap of some sort. What do you expect as evolution continues to grind away?
Okay. Well, again, an opinion that probably isn't all that popular with the folk, but I believe...
Throw it in the bucket. The bucket's already full.
I believe, well, it's about to overflow. I believe that humans are done evolving. That contrary to all of the alleged science articles depicting humans with giant foreheads to fit their bigger brains and longer fingers, et cetera,
This is it, huh?
This is it. We're done. And I can tell you why we're done.
Are you sure you're not speaking on a purely personal level now?
Well,
Sorry.
Well, I'm always speaking on a personal level, but I'll tell you why. This is my personal belief.
Okay.
And it kind of goes back to the theory again that basically, with the evolution of self-conscious awareness, humans have transcended the process of natural selection. Let me explain. So, up until humans, let's say there's a shift in the Earth's axis and the temperature of the planet drops 100 degrees. Well, what happens? The environment changes and all of the animals that exist on the planet suddenly have to adapt. So let's say, for instance, the creature with the furriest coat tends to survive and reproduce lives long enough to reproduce, whereas the others in its species start to die off. 5 million years later, we've got a furrier species, such as the woolly mammoth. Now, humans come along, and that's how evolution has worked from the beginning of organic matter, 3.2 billion years ago. So now all of a sudden man comes into the picture, and because of our capacity for self-conscious awareness, the temperature drops, as I said before, it gets colder. We don't sit passively back like every other animal. We can say, I am cold, and we have the digits and mathematical and engineering capacity to manufacture a coat of fur in an hour. And that applies to every possible technology. If we look up at the sky and say, oh, look at those lucky birds, think how advantageous it would be to fly. Boom, we build wings. We want to go underwater like the fish. Boom, submarines. Whatever we want, basically, we can manufacture it. We can travel, unlike any species, we can migrate to any portion of the planet, and we can create a synthetic environment in which we can survive.
And with that, we will leave him for tonight. Come back tomorrow for part 3 of the God part of the brain. Until then, please make sure you do like, share, and subscribe. Help us get to that goal of 50,000 views, 1,000 subscribers. So Boxy over and Extra sends those nice red packages we can send to all of you. And of course, Google puts us on the algorithms to help us out to remain viable. Coinbase, Ibotta, Know the drill and dose, and we'll avoid that. And until next time, like, share, and subscribe, be kind to one another, and always release the Krekens as we march along this overnight and every overnight here from day one. Have a great night's sleep. We'll see you tomorrow.